All right. I think we are getting started here. Welcome. Hello, everyone. We are excited to kick off the first of a 6 webinar series, Margin Warfare, How Human Sellers Can Outsmart AI. I'm excited to introduce our esteemed panelists for these 6 sessions. First, we have Kristen Westberg, founder and CEO of the Rev Collective, who brings a wealth of expertise in helping businesses unlock revenue potential. Joining her is Brian Gray, founder and CEO of Revenue Path Group, also co-author of The Priority Sale and creator of the Priority Sale methodology, a groundbreaking approach that cuts through the noise and drives decisive action from buyers. Together, they'll guide us through today's conversation, sharing insights that can help your sales team access and influence higher level prospects to protect and grow your margin. Before we dive in, let's start with a few key questions for Brian. What brings us together here today? Why is this topic urgent and relevant right now? And most importantly, how can you trust us to guide you through it?
Wow, good questions. Thank you, Ari. Good day, everyone. Happy Election Day. I hope you all made time to get our vote in and have our voice heard. The reason I believe we're here, Ari and Kristen and everyone, is that our world is going through unprecedented change. You don't need me to tell you that. But what I also believe is that this change is compounding. And what it's going to be doing is it's going to make it more and more difficult for us to have the real right kind of conversations with our prospects at the highest level possible. And since what the price we're going to pay for this, as information becomes even more ubiquitous, as access becomes easy, so everyone's in on every opportunity, and we're soon approaching a world where intelligence will become even free. It's going to make it very difficult to hold, grow, sustain anything to do with margin. And what we find interesting is that our sales function is really our last defense to margin. So much so that if they can't defend your margin better, it's going to put you in a really rough spot moving forward. But what we have found is that the properly equipped, prepared, and developed sales teams are able to actually grow their organizational margin through their sales function. So this is not literally a conversation around how to sell better today. It's really about how can we actually create much greater margins through our sales function. That's why we're here.
Thank you, Brian. Today's conversation is about tackling one of the toughest challenges sales teams face, protecting and expanding margins in a highly competitive, rapidly evolving market. With rising operational costs and customer expectations, securing profitable deals has become more complex. We'll dive into the strategies to help your team create lasting value and win high margin deals that strengthen your organization's profitability and resilience. Please type any questions that come up for you into the Q&A box as we progress through the discussion. We will have some time after the panel to review these questions and provide answers. Now, Brian, your work focuses around the challenges sellers face today, and you refer to the 3 deadly C's. Tell us about these 3 deadly C's. What are they, and what do they mean for sales teams?
Yeah, absolutely. But let me start first, Ari, by showing what we believe. We believe that the biggest current threat organizations face today is becoming a commodity in their prospects' eyes. And what's making it worse, decision-making teams keep getting bigger. And they're ignoring salespeople till the very end of their buying journey, right? It's creating what we call this race to the bottom. In fact, let me share a couple slides if you don't mind here. Because this race to the bottom, this race won't stop on its own. And it's being driven by what we call the 3 deadly C's: commoditization, compressed selling time, and consensus decision making. So not only to your prospect's brain does everyone look, sound, and act the same, we have less face time to sell than we've ever had before. And we now deal with decision-making teams that average nearly 7 people. And this becomes quite a problem because, as I mentioned, this race won't stop. And I'll visualize this for everyone to help kind of get a glimpse of this. When we see the buying journey, on the right-hand side, we see procurement. That's when the prospect's shopping and seeking a solution. Prior to that, organizations plan for what initiatives make the most sense and how they allocate their time, energy, and resources appropriately. But if you look on the far left-hand side here, we see organizational priorities. This is what always gets the attention. It's what's the most pressing and urgent threats to your ideal prospect's organization. And what happens, this kind of symbolizes the race to the bottom. And what happens to our margin is that the later we enter a sale, the more margin we lose. That's why when I work with sales teams, Kristen, what we both do is, we always, the worst time to enter the sales when the prospect's actually looking for a solution, which is nearly blasphemous. But the reality is when margin becomes the oxygen we need as an organization, merely entering a sale when a prospect's already shopping has most of our margin taken out of the equation.
Yeah.
Gartner did a study in 2020 that showed that 83% of the buying journey is over before they even invite a salesperson in. So guess where we're entering? We're entering at the worst possible time. That's why you get the apples to apples comparison. This is a challenge. Now, while there might be a sale in play, the margin is what I'm most concerned with, because margin is what every CEO needs to grow his or her business. So where our sellers are entering today doesn't give us that margin ability, but where we need to be is in much earlier to higher level. It's just today it's harder than ever because of these 3 deadly C's for us to get access to real decision makers. So not only do we believe that salespeople are showing up way too late in the buying journey, we also fundamentally believe they're selling up to 2 levels lower than they probably should.
That's great. Thank you, Brian.
Yep.
Kristen, what are the consequences of the 3 deadly C's if sales teams can't overcome them?
Yeah. So I echo everything Brian said. We're all experiencing that in real time. And ultimately, when your prospects have done all of their research, they're coming to you. You saw that apples to apples comparison. They don't see any real difference between you and your competitors. And when that happens, they won't be willing to pay more for your solution. If you cannot articulate your unique value and ultimately answer the question, why you will not be able to defend your margin. Your prospects will not think you are worth more to them than your competitors. And you'll get into that price war, that race to the bottom to win the deal. So when that happens, sorry, Brian.
No, so we do it to ourselves, don't we, Kristen? The idea when you mentioned you're at that show and you saw all those banks with all the same,
oh gosh,
all saying the same thing to people.
Yeah. No, that's a great illustration. I was recently attending an event where there were several financial services businesses, a bank, a credit union, a wealth management company that had their their pop-up banners side by side. And I'm looking at them and they're all saying the same thing. We offer the best service. We have the best rates. We're, all these things. And it's like, well, okay, so why would I choose one of you over the other? So yeah, I mean, at that point in the deal, you're usually stuck answering what we call the 3 ugly questions for a chance to win the deal, to make a sale. And those questions are, can you do it? Which really tells us they're not interested anymore in quality or value. They're solely interested in your bandwidth to execute. The second is, do you want it? What a tricky question, because if you want it badly enough, you're going to find a way to make it happen. So now they've got all the power, the ball is in their court. They have taken control. So then lastly is how much, and now your back's against the wall. You're in defense mode. They're ready to drive that price right down to the bottom.
So, Brian, when sellers are able to overcome the 3 deadly C's, what are they able to now do that their competitors can't?
Yeah, why do I get the fun one? Sorry, Kristen.
Debbie Downer. No.
Yeah, right. Well, but it's interesting because one has to build on the other. What Kristen was talking to is about existing demand. And that's where they already know what they want. They know what they're looking for. And as she mentioned, the 3 ugly questions. The real issue here is that we are just 12 to 18 months away from an AI sales agent answering all 3 of those questions.
Mm-hmm.
So really the value of a human seller doesn't even exist anymore when it comes to existing demand. Where we're striving from a human seller perspective is how can we actually create demand? How can we actually drive higher margins by being much more influential? But to be able to do that, we have to actually start a conversation with a complete stranger around an idea that they've yet to even consider. And this is probably the biggest parting of the sea, if you will, from a seller's perspective, because they're so used to being brought in late and trying to defend their value as similar as they sound to everyone else. But where we see organizations winning today is their ability to start a buying journey, to actually create demand at a much higher level, which really blocks everyone else out. And that's where we're seeing greater margins, right, and stronger revenues when you can actually influence the opportunity. And we see this varies. This varies with organizations we've worked with who are struggling to get in earlier. A contractor, as an example, they were struggling to get in to do this work because the architects were holding them at bay until they were ready for the RFP to come out. But it's only when JC Anderson started talking about the real threats the architect deals with on a project did they start earning that access and were able to create, I think, $7 million in business in 4 months because they merely aligned what they really did with their ideal prospects' real priorities. Because we're not at procurement here, we're not at planning, we are at the priority level of the organization. So it's really important to position ourselves properly to be able to do that.
Thank you, Brian. And so leading into that, why has margin become such an important part of the sale today?
Yeah, well, I believe margins like oxygen. I hear CEOs all the time to say we're as busy as ever and can't even keep up. And I tell them they have a margin problem because I don't think any organization should be struggling to keep up if they are creating enough margin. So the reality is, do you want revenue or do you want margin? Because they used to be interconnected and no more. So we look at margin first and foremost as oxygen. And to avoid this margin collapse we're going to be dealing with as we move from the information age to the intelligence age driven by AI, is we break margin into 2 parts. The first part is what I call below the line margin. And that's margin that we create internally where we cut costs, we consolidate, we reduce headcount, we do the things that make sense sometimes it doesn't, but we work on our below the line margin. The other part is what I call above the line margin. That is the margin given or granted or earned from my prospects, the value they perceive me bringing to them. And when you think about both above the line and below the line margin, and you look at this blue bracket as our margin expectation of as an organization, we have some margin coming from above, we have some margin coming from below. But what I just shared with you on that race to the bottom, we start seeing our margin really leaving from the sales perspective. I hear it all the time. We've got to match the price to win the work. But then where does that leave you from a margin perspective? And when we can't create above the line margin, it leaves us with 2 really tough choices. The first choice is we learn to live with less margin, which I don't think a PE firm or even owners or yourself would be really down with learning to having to sell more at lower margin, which is why you get busier than ever and can't keep up. So I learned to live with less margin, or I keep cutting and I go below what we call the lean line. Lean's good. Lean's making the smartest, best operational decisions. But when you have to continue cutting below the lean line, it gets really painful. And in fact, it creates a cascading effect. All because we were not able to hold our above the line margin because we are being commoditized, and the 3 deadly C's are doing that to us. But there are 2 better choices. How about we simply start fighting back for what we choose or actually get what we deserve? So we believe that there's a big opportunity for margin creation from your sales function, but they have to be prepared, developed, and equipped to be able to do that.
Perfect. So speaking of that, Kristen, how should sales teams adjust their strategies when there's little room left for margin improvement in operations?
Yeah. I mean, when operations have been optimized to the max, hitting that lean line, and there's really no room for further margin improvement below the line without causing some other dire consequences, sales teams really need to shift their focus to driving margin during the sale. So you can see here when, where, and how you enter the sales process determines how much margin you'll be able to earn in the sale. And margin is best created before the prospect is even shopping, right? We don't want to be dealing with procurement. Entering the sale earlier and at higher levels, like Brian showed you before, getting, ideally at least two levels up, if not all the way to the top, is what's going to help you earn the most margin. It will also help you sell faster, win more deals, as well as defend your margins. So in order to start your buyer's journey, so in order to influence your prospect and create demand, you ultimately have to understand how the human brain establishes priorities. So in order to win the brain, you need a strong story that essentially clicks with your buyer's instinctive needs. And what that story needs to do, it needs to address a real threat. So Brian mentioned this before, right? We don't establish priorities based on benefits or, soft, better than scenarios. This story needs to address a real threat that your solution eliminates. And your buyer needs to believe that this threat is credible for you to gain their trust and their attention. Brian and I were recently working with a company that helps private jet charter operations, so private jet operations, increase their sales and ultimately the utilization of their planes, which they call fleet utilization. And their service model was very disruptive, very innovative for the space. So fortunately for them, they weren't actually dealing with procurement sales, but as a bigger challenge, they actually had to go out and create demand for their service. And when they got started, they were going for kind of lowest hanging fruit. They were actually approaching the sale through the lowest level entry point, which was usually a sales coordinator or administrator. And they just couldn't connect to that particular prospect's priority and start a buying journey. So they were just getting stuck repeatedly over and over. And ultimately, what we did is we helped them reframe their story, tell a different story, as well as change their approach to getting that access, gaining influence with the actual CEOs and owners of these private jet charter operations. And finally, they were able to tell a story that connected to a priority and ultimately create demand for their service.
It is a great story. Great client.
Yeah, fun one.
So understanding that a seller's ability to drive margin correlates to when they enter the sales process. Could you explain those two moments of truth that occur during the buying journey, Kristen?
Of course. We've already got one on the screen.
I know,
and-
sorry about that. I couldn't go
Good.
back. I'm sorry.
You're getting excited, right? What are we talking about? Well, the first
Yes.
is the procurement moment of truth. So we've already touched upon this a little bit, but what this is essentially your buyer has already decided this is a priority. They're already out shopping for a solution. They've already done 83% of their research. And now they're considering your solution alongside those other comparable alternatives, that apples to apples comparison, where you face a price war, where your margin is usually compromised because you get to those three ugly questions. And the only way for you to even stand out here, to show your value, to differentiate your solution, is to answer that fundamental question, why you? Now, the second moment of truth, which is the priority sale, right? This is where we're getting in when we're accessing higher level prospects, we're commanding influence. We connect to our buyer's priority. We create demand. We start a buying journey, right? How do we do this? Well, in order to do this, your sellers now must be able to answer the question, why this, why now, and why you? So in the priority sale, you see here, this is where your ideal prospects live and greater margin resides.
Thank you, Kristen. So Brian, I know we're coming up on time here soon, and I want to leave some time at the end for questions, but what are some tactics, real tactics sales teams can use to maximize margin during these two moments?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Ari, and thank you, Kristen. As Kristen mentioned, the study of the procurement moment of truth, that's where everyone's entering now, and there's so little margin left. And I believe that your sales function has to be used to help you create stronger, healthier margins for the organization, but it's going to change how we go about selling. And what our sellers must be able to do is start conversation with complete strangers who aren't even shopping, right? And they have to address, why should I talk about this idea and this idea now, and then why should I choose you? So really, we have 3 jobs that need to be done, and I look forward to covering some of these in some of our bite-sized chunk webinar series, right? So the first job is they need the right approach. How can they get someone's attention before they even have thought about considering a solution, which I believe is the most powerful tool a human seller can have right now? Second, they need the right selling tools. What kind of tools, what kind of presentation ability to actually align a decision making? How are they going to speak at the right environment? So the right tools are important. And finally, do your sellers have the right skills in order to sell much earlier in the buying journey when it's very, very hard to get there? So it's only when these 3 work together do we provide sellers or give them the opportunity to start gaining some of those earlier opportunities where they can create much greater margin.
That's perfect. And these are some of the things that we're going to be diving into over the next 5 sessions together. Thank you, Kristen and Brian, for sharing these powerful strategies and concepts. Now, we'd like to open it up for questions to our audience. If you have a question that you have not yet put into the Q&A box, please go ahead and do that now. I'll do my best to get through as many as we can and what time we have left.
Thanks, Ari.
Yeah. All right, looks like we have one. How do I know if my sellers are ready or able to do this?
Yeah, I'll take this one. Yeah, I mean, to us, the best way to assess is to really think about those 2 moments of truth and those key questions and understand, how is your sales team answering these questions right now? So when a buyer approaches your sales team and they're already seeking a solution, it's already a priority, they're in a buying journey, they've done all their own research, and they're doing that apples to apples comparison. So it's you and these other lookalike solutions that you're up against. How do your sellers answer that question, why you? Are they actually able to explain your unique value and differentiate your solution? Or is it that same example that we shared earlier, where your pop-up banner and your unique value is verbatim what your other competitors are saying, right? So you won't be able to defend your margin unless your sellers can do that. And then also in that first moment of truth. So are your sellers actually able to create demand? Are they able to start buying journeys with higher level prospects? Can they answer why this, why now, and why you to create demand? And, even backing up a little bit more, who are the most valuable target accounts for your solution? What criteria are you using to even make that determination? Again, to really influence our prospect to start a buying journey, we have to tell a story that connects to a threat your prospect is facing in order to gain credibility and trust and really create demand. So the other question to ask is, who is that highest level prospect, right? Is your sales team out there going for that lowest level gatekeeper, easiest to access prospect, because they'll answer the phone or respond to an email? Or who should you be going after? Who is that highest level prospect? Because if your narrative, if your story is successfully talking about a threat that your solution eliminates, you need to be delivering that story to the person who feels that threat the deepest, right? That's who you're going to establish trust and credibility with and be able to influence. And, Can you talk about how you uniquely eliminate that threat and describe the future state that you create for them by doing so? So I think if you ask your sales teams these fundamental questions and compare their answers, you'll get a really good pulse on whether or not your team is actually able to execute on this.
Great questions to be asking ourselves as sales leaders.
Mhm.
Wonderful. Looks like we have one more question we might be able to fit in here. Leads in very nicely, actually. So how do we get access earlier at a higher level? Maybe
Man,
Brian.
that's the segue award, the segue to our, I think it is important because it's one thing to say, I don't know how to defend myself when I'm brought in late, yet there's so little margin left. So that really only leaves us one choice, right? If we want to keep from having to continue cutting and cutting to achieve our margin expectation, we've got to go find ways to create greater margin. And to be able to do that, we need to better prepare, better equip, right? And better develop our salespeople. So I think it's our next session, I think, isn't it, Ari, where we're going to talk about not just the tools we need, but how do we craft a message that actually resonates with a complete stranger who wasn't even thinking about this or that particular solution, who instantly says, that's exactly what's on my mind. I would love to talk to you about that. Every single organization we've met or even have worked with have always been able to find their real impact. And to Kristen's point, it's at a much higher level than you're probably calling on right now. But when you do that, you're going to find much greater success and much higher margins.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brian. And yes, in the following sessions, we will be diving into all of these areas in much more depth and answering a lot of these hows and why and going to be very, very productive sessions. So before we wrap up, I'd like to remind everyone about our next session coming up next Tuesday at 11, November 12th, Mountain Time. So the topic is the 3 most important steps your sales team is missing. So we're going to explore the priority sale approach, discuss tools that you can use to engage your prospect's primitive brain, which we'll talk about, and provide insights on how to reach your prospects at higher decision-making levels. So mark your calendars now if you do not want to miss it. We're also going to be sharing some important links in an email following up on this webinar, including access to Kristen's calendar, if you'd like to schedule up a follow-up conversation with Brian and Kristen about how these concepts apply to your business. So please be sure to follow the Rev Collective and Revenue Path Group on LinkedIn for updates on these sessions and more insights like those we covered in the session today. So thank you all once again for joining us, and a huge thank you to our speakers for sharing their expertise. We look forward to seeing you at our next session.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.